So in today's session, we're gonna review the major elements of the traditional journal article format in science writing, and that is the IMRAD format. IMRD, sometimes also referred to as IMRAD, and this stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, Discussion. And I'm not telling you anything drastically new. This is, you've read these articles over and over in your careers. By the way, the other acronym, IMRAD with the A, it just stands for the same thing: Introduction, Methods, Research, and Discussion. So the and gets a lowercase a. So the IMRAD structure is the premier format that you will be presenting your research to the scientific community. There's other formats, of course, but this is really sort of the heartbeat of scientific communication. So we're going to cover all four parts: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. I have a few examples I'm going to take you through in some of the videos. I'm going to have you do some work on your own as well. So for each section, you're going to do a little bit of work on it yourselves. So for the introduction section, this is part one. I'm going to give a quick overview over some best practices, best ways to structure your introduction section, what to include, what to focus on, what not to focus on, and I'll show you an example, and I'll take you through how this example actually captures some of these elements. And then the video will end, and you'll actually be doing some work on your own on another sample introduction from one of Henry's articles. He was generous enough to make it available to us. And when you finish that, I want you to work on it individually or in pairs, however you prefer, and then share with the group what you found. How does this particular introduction follow the outline, the suggested outline that I've reviewed with you in this video? And then you'll watch another short video where I actually review that introduction for you as well, just to kind of get us all on the same page. Then there's a video, methods and results, and then there's some stuff on discussion, and then I have a short video on the writing process as well. Okay, so let's get started with the introduction. So envision the introduction section as an inverted triangle, where you're going to start off with the general background, focusing on what you already know about the subject, or what do we as an audience already know about the subject. You then want to continue getting a little narrower and focusing on the knowledge gap. What is missing? What don't we know? And ultimately culminating your introduction section, the very tip of the triangle at the bottom, your hypothesis, your research question, your statement of purpose, your aims, whichever format you choose to tell your reader what you are doing, what you're trying to do in your study. And you also want to include your proposed plan to address this very briefly, not in great detail, because that's going to be reserved for your methods section. So a couple of other or actually, let me review briefly with you how to structure the effective introduction in terms of paragraph length. Most introductions in science articles tend to be 3 paragraphs long. Sometimes they're 4 to 5, rarely are they longer. And actually, the one that we're looking at today in this video, and the one that you're going to do work with, that was written by Henry and his colleagues, all those have 5 paragraphs. And I'll tell you why they have 5 rather than just 3. So let me walk you through the proposed structure first. So the first paragraph, you should focus on the what do we already know, the context of your study. Second paragraph, what's the gap you identified? What do we not yet know? And in the last paragraph, how do you address the gap in your study? What did you do about it? Briefly outlining how you propose to address this, and ultimately including your hypothesis. So the reason why we sometimes see introductions that are 4 to 5 paragraphs long, they usually what happens is that the first section, this first part, becomes 2 to 3 paragraphs. So the context of your study, outlining what do we already know, sometimes takes a little longer, and it's not unusual. So a couple of more tips and tricks for an effective intro. Make sure you write the section for general audience. Keep jargon to a minimum. Tell a story, right? So if you can't tell the story to your grandmother, your spouse who's not a scientist, or your favorite aunt, or basically a street vendor, you're not doing your job. You want to watch out for paragraph length. Don't let them get too long. Don't let them get too short. You want to follow the general roadmap, right? The known, unknown, your hypothesis. What do we already know? What don't we know? and what are you going to do about it? When you do this, really make sure you emphasize how your study fills the gap. You might even want to address limitations in existing studies, and we'll see some of that actually happening in the example that I'll show you, as well as in the article that Henry has graciously agreed for us to look at. Make sure you're crystal clear about stating a research question hypothesis. This is not the time to kind of be vague. Be very clear. Ideally using we proposed that, or we found that, blah, 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 or we want to do this, right? Focus on the what are you doing. You don't want to include too many details in your intro. Focus on the big picture. So don't get too bogged down in the details. Details are reserved for your method section. So remember I talked to you about the reverted triangle for the introduction, and I'll talk to you when we get to the discussion section about the actual triangle. And so right here in the middle, where it's very specific, that's where your methods and results are. So this is where you can use all the detail and specificity you want. And then lastly, make sure you don't answer your research question in your introduction. That's reserved for your discussion. So the sample introduction I want to share with you is from an article from 2009 in Drug Safety. It's called, okay, I'm going to butcher this, Thiazolidine, whatever, and cardiovascular events in patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus, a retrospective cohort study of over 473,000 patients using the National Health Insurance Database in Taiwan. It's a very large study. We're going to see examples of this throughout all the videos because I think it's a really interesting study and it's very well written. So I included here the background and objective of the study just to, if you have a context for this. Concern has been expressed over the cardiovascular risk associated with rosiglitazone and pioglitazone, and they're often referred to as TZMs. TZMs. This study investigates the association between oral antihyperglycemics, namely these different things, I'm not going to pronounce them, with myocardial infarction, congestive heart failure, angina pectoris, stroke, and transient ischemic attack. So I'll write how all these drugs affect the heart in patients who have type 2 diabetes. So that's the context of the study. So here's the introduction. I want you to notice that in this particular article, it's actually called background. Often you don't have any heading for this introduction section. Sometimes you write introduction, sometimes you use background. Sometimes the journals, or often the journals, will have specific terms that they like to use to be consistent throughout their publication. So that's something that you'll figure out when you work with the editor, or when you read the instructions to the authors when you select an article, a journal that you want to publish in. So I have here the first 3 paragraphs, and they all cover that first part, what's known, the context of the study. Okay, so the TCDs. I think I said earlier TZMs and then TCDs. Sorry about that, wrong letter. So these TZDs, namely those drugs that they're investigating, they're great because it says here they reduce the body's resistance to insulin, right? This is great for type 2 diabetes. But then, however, recent studies have basically shown that this is kind of a problem that causes all sorts of issues related around the heart. So I want to point out one beautiful sentence to you here. That's a really strong statement at the end of that first paragraph, resetting the stage for what is known. The concern is well justified, as cardiovascular disease is one of the most important causes of morbidity and mortality among patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus, right? So we really have to pay attention to issues around the heart when it comes to patients who have type 2 diabetes, because that's one of the main causes people die. Again, really clear statement of what's known and also why it's important, the big picture. The other thing I want to show you is at the end of that last paragraph. So before I get there though, just very briefly, the second paragraph continues citing some of the sources. It really focuses on congestive heart failure and some other studies that have shown some of these terrible effects of the study of these particular drugs on patients with type 2 diabetes. And then the last paragraph, in addition to congestive heart failure, there's other increased risk of cardiovascular events in diabetic patients when they're treated with these TCDs. And, again, more support from existing research. So in the next section, MERETI, 3 parts in introduction. What do we already know? What don't we know yet? And what's your hypothesis? So the second part, what do we not yet know yet, is also the time to show the research gap. These authors, however, already, and I think this is really well done, already start leading into this at the end of this third paragraph. So look at this. On the other hand, to date, most studies examining the adverse cardiovascular outcomes associated with TZDs have been clinical trials. How their results apply to day-to-day clinical practice is not clear, right? So just reading this, I'm already expecting, well, they're going to tell me how this, how their study is going to focus on day-to-day clinical practice, which we know because they looked at over 700,000 patients. So this is a lead into the knowledge gap. And it's this really beautiful setup, because then you see the next paragraph, we'll look at it in a second, does that really well, explaining what some of the gaps are. And then the last paragraph in this intro really goes into, you'll see this in a moment, how the study addresses it. 2 more things I want to point out here. So here, there were early debates about the safety of TZDs, and then also this underline in the other paragraph, in addition to CHF. So what I like, so this paragraph really focuses on safety of TZDs for patients with congestive heart failure. It's right here in the topic sentence, very beautifully done. And then, of course, the next paragraph has a great transition. In addition to CHF, recent studies, especially and so on, have raised a concern about other issues. So just to show you that you can really take a reader along and tell a story about what are some of the major issues to pay attention to. So let's look at the last 2 paragraphs. So paragraph 4 here addresses the knowledge gap. Paragraph 5 presents the hypothesis. So here, the authors clearly go into the research gap. They do include an introductory sentence that references a study that is not doing what needs to be done. Because then they cleverly start with, however, questions on the effect of long-term use of TZDs in younger patients or in patients with newly diagnosed diabetes were left unanswered. Like most studies involving TZDs, the effects of dose and duration of TZD medication on cardiovascular events are left unanswered, right? It's all about these cardiovascular events. And we notice already from the little blurb that I shared with you. In addition, a conclusive direct head-to-head comparison between rosiglitazone and pioglitazone has not been reported. Right? So I'm expecting this will be something these authors will answer. And don't you know, let's look at the last paragraph. So very clearly, they start off with using this claims database. We conducted a 6-year population-based retrospective cohort study. So right here, they're telling me how they're doing it very briefly, and then describing exactly what they're looking for in this last sentence. We specifically designed and conducted a study to evaluate differences in cardiovascular events in users of rosiglitazone and pioglitazone. Remember, right here, they actually mentioned that, gee, this hasn't actually happened yet. Nobody has looked at the comparison of these 2 TZDs. Guess what? We're doing it. So again, great setup in the limitations, in the knowledge gap section on addressing how these authors are actually going to answer that question. Okay? So I want you now to look at the sample introduction from the article that Henry and his colleagues wrote. And then when you come back to the videos, I'll be there waiting for you, so to speak, to walk you through that section as well.